All right, so 3.3 part 2. This is still completing the square. It's just completing the square in a different way. And it's specifically talking about completing the square when a is not equal to 1. So I could give you a question that looks something like this, where it's 6x times x plus 2 equals negative 42. Okay, so I could give you something that looks like this. Now that being said, we have a couple different scenarios when when a is not equal to 1. This is a weird looking thing right here. This is not what we're used to seeing. Remember how we're used to seeing it as ax squared plus bx equals c? So this is the way that we're used to seeing it. This is not the way that we're used to seeing it. So what I would do first is I would double distribute here to get 6x squared plus 12x equals 42. Now this is, again, just kind of a common sense thing for a lot of people, but there are some people that are going to miss it. Right here, it is okay for me to divide both sides of an equation by the same thing. So if I'm dividing both sides of an equation by the same thing, that means that I can divide this by 6 and I can divide this by 6. So
Isn't it negative 42?
Yep, thanks.
Or okay.
So obviously there's two different scenarios. One of the scenarios is when that number works out really, really nicely and it goes into everything. The other scenario is not quite as nice because it might not go into everything perfectly. This is the scenario where everything works perfectly. So this will turn into x squared plus 2x equals negative 7. And now we can go through our completing the square process, and it shouldn't be too bad when we go through the completing the square process. All right. So that being said, I can't scroll down on this one either, so I'm going to have to write kind of all over the place. So if you get confused on what I'm doing, make sure you let me know. So now this is set up for completing the square. It's x squared plus something x equals something else. And then what we're going to do is go through our b over 2 process. So I have 2 divided by 2, which is 1. And then my b squared, or b over 2 squared term is going to be 1 squared, which equals 1. This thing is even worse than my one at school, apparently. Oops. So we have our 1 squared, and that's going to equal 1. All right, so that 1 is what I'm going to add to both sides of the equation. So I've got x squared plus 2x and then I've got the thing that I'm adding to both sides, and the thing that I'm adding to both sides is plus 1. All right, so now we go through our process of factoring the same exact way that we would have before. So it's going to be our x plus b term. So x plus b over 2 is 1. So x plus 1 squared equals negative 6. Okay. So now we just have our set process of being able to solve this thing. So I know that I have to square root both sides. So when I solve this, I'm going to get x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 6. So I like to simplify the square root of negative 6 right now, so that way I don't have to do it later. So I know that the square root of negative 6 can break down into the square root of negative 1 and the square root of 6. So that will be I. The square root of 6 can't simplify anymore, so it's just going to be I times the square root of 6. So this will be x plus 1 equals plus or minus I times the square root of 6. And now I'm going to subtract from each side, so I get x equals negative 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 6. Now, if it asks you for two solutions, you're obviously just going to do x equals negative 1 plus I times the square root of 6, and then your other solution would be negative 1 minus I times the square root of 6. Okay? Any questions on this? Anything that you want to see? Anything that you want to talk about on this one? All right, so then there's one other type of, question that we can run into, and that's when that number doesn't go in perfectly. So this is from that worksheet, and I want to show you what that worksheet looks like. But like if we look at this right here, if we look at this one, we can obviously see that we can't divide the whole thing by 8, okay? So I'm going to pull this one up. So we obviously can't divide this one by 8, because if we tried to divide that one by 8, we would end up with this not being a good term. That would end up being a decimal. And remember, all of our answers are supposed to be exact here, which means that nice decimals have to be nice, or decimals have to be nice. So the way that you can work through this one is you can just work on this side only. So what I would do is I would factor out an 8 from just the one side. So x squared plus 2x equals 42. And I wouldn't change the right side at all. So notice how this side, I have kind of the right looking thing. This side I haven't touched. So what you do is you just pay attention to the inside and you complete the square just like normal on the inside. So I would still go through and do the same exact thing as I did on the inside. So 2 over 2 equals 1. And then I'm going to do 1 squared equals 1. Why does this thing not write equal signs? So 1 squared equals 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides of the equation the same exact way that I did the last time. But you have to think about something really, really important. So I'm going to rewrite this, giving a little bit of space. I'm going to add something to both sides of the equation. So now if you think about this, I'm adding 1 to this side because that's what the completing the square is. But this is a really, really crucial step solving like this. Because if you think about this, this 8 is being distributed to everything on the inside, right? So if you think about it, I would distribute this 8 through everything. So this 8 would get multiplied by 1. So I'm not really adding 1 to the left side. I'm adding 8 times 1 to the left side. So I have to add 8 to this side. Okay? So think about that again. If I have 8 over here and I have everything in parentheses, using the distributive property, I would have to distribute this 8 to every single thing on the inside of the parentheses. I am not adding 1 on the left side. I'm adding 8 distributed to 1, which would be 8. Okay? So now we can go through and factor just like we normally would. So now I'm going to leave that 8 on the outside. So 8 and then x plus 1 squared equals 42 plus 8 is 50. And then now we just go about solving this the same exact way that we would solve every other one of the questions. So divide by 8, divide by 8. So then I'm left with x plus 1 squared equals 25, or 8 over, or 50 over 8 can simplify down if you want it to, is 25 over 4, right? So if you simplify that, it's 25 over 4. Now we can take the square root. So then I'm going to be left with x plus 1 equals the square root of, and I'm going to put my plus or minus here. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 4 is 2. And now I can just move that x over. So I get x equals negative 1 plus or minus 5 over 2. So it's the same kind of process. You just have to be really careful with what you're adding to each side of the equation. Does anyone have any questions on this as we sit here right now?
What's under the 25?
That's supposed to be a 4.
Okay.
Quit making fun of my handwriting.
So if the end answer is a fraction, what's stopping us from dividing 42 by 8 at the beginning? This will work out. You could divide 42 by 8 at the beginning if it worked out to be nice, right? So if it worked out to be a nice decimal, that's totally fine. So if it was like 2.5, it really isn't a big deal. But if it doesn't work out to be super nice, then you have to leave it in exact form, because remember, like 1/3 and 0.33 are not the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. So if it works out to be nice, then absolutely do that. I don't know what 42 divided by 8 is though.
It would have been 5.25.
So it's 5 1/4. So it would be nice. So you could do that if you wanted to. So if you wanted to, you absolutely could. But if that was a 41, or if that was if the right side was a 3 or whatever, it might not necessarily work out to be nice. So I just wanted to show you a scenario that gets you through every single one of those.
Mr. Shepard.
Yeah.
Why is I'm a little confused on why the 8 is being added to the 42.
So remember this side right here. You're good with how I added the 1 right there?
Yeah.
Okay, so I added 1 on this side. But this 8 is being multiplied to everything on the inside, right? Like we'd have to distribute this 8 using math properties, I would have to distribute that 8 to everything, right?
Hmm.
So if I'm multiplying 8 times x squared, which that's what we get up here, if I'm multiplying 8 times 2x, that's what I get up here, I would have to multiply the 8 times 1, which means I'm not really adding 1 to the left side. I'm adding 8 times 1 to the left side. So since I'm adding 8 times 1 to the left side, in order to keep that equation balanced, I have to add 8 to the right side. Because when that 8
okay.
gets distributed, it's really like adding 8 over here. I have to add the same number over here to keep that equation balanced.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions you guys can think of before I stop recording? Okay, beautiful.